I just learned that, well, on July the 23rd, Bishop Bernardino Piñera died. Now, he was the last living bishop appointed by Pius XII. And there's a lot of commotion in Twitterland, because some people started to point this out, that, basically, for those people who claim that Pius XII was the last reigning pope, apostolicity is done and over with, because the last bishop with possibility of regaining jurisdiction is gone. So the church is no longer apostolic in mission. You have a bishopless church. Well, you had a bishopless church for the longest time, but now it's like a death certificate to sedevacantists, because there's no possibility of ever regaining that. And some sedevacantists started to give some flack and to attack these people, and some of them tried to as they usually do, they just create theology out of thin air. Just some ad hoc theologians making up some legal alternatives and stuff. Some posited that a false pope could still grant ordinary jurisdiction in strange circumstances. Others claim that, you still have the bishops appointed by Bishop Took. So those bishops, they're still legitimate, because the Bishop Took, remember, Pius XII gave him an authorization to consecrate bishops without papal mandate. Well, there's a problem with that, because even if you had authorization, if you were authorized to consecrate bishops without papal mandate, you still need a Roman pontiff. This is very clear in, I think, Ad Sinarum Gentes by Pius XII. He is very clear in stating that jurisdiction, this is not just canonical thing. This is church teaching. Okay, this is official church teaching by Pius XII. He claimed jurisdiction flows from the Roman pontiff, not just an ethereal vacancy in Rome. No, a Roman pontiff, a living successor, a living Roman pontiff. So you still need the Pope. I mean, you don't need the mandate, you need the Pope still. And in those cases of bishops, consecrated in vacancy, a successor would by tacit approval grant jurisdiction to that bishop. But you still need the Roman pontiff and the possibility of electing a successor, of course. You don't have that. Some others, speculated that, bishop can be granted jurisdiction in cases of necessity. No, he doesn't. I mean, there's supply jurisdiction for certain acts, but not acts of government. For confession, for some sacraments and stuff like that. But you still need ordinary jurisdiction to have a mission in the church and for governance in the church. Governance of the church is not supplied. Okay? It's ordinary. It needs to be ordinary. And the problem is that some of these people, they adhere to the sedeprivationist thesis, these formalitaire, materialitaire, formal material thesis, also known as the Cathiciacum thesis. proposed by Gerard de Laurier, this Thut bishop, who was, he was a very renowned theologian, and he was the personal theological advisor to Pius XII. So he had some credentials on his resume. And the Casichæcum thesis, in appearance, I mean, at least from a vantage point, on its surface, it appeared to be very, reasonable, very theologically sound, and, intellectually enticing. And I actually considered that for some time before just accepting the fact that this is unsurmountable. This is all just an unsurmountable obstacle after unsurmountable obstacle, and that there's no way out from this one-way street. This is basically just a dead end. Okay. But well, I considered it. But then when you start to think it over and kind of look at the premises of the whole thing, it just won't work from the get-go. It just won't work. And why? I'm going to tell you why. Theologians and canonists often speculated on, what would happen if we had no cardinals, or if an imperfect council would not, it couldn't be called in time. Then, well, they speculated that the universal church at large would be the one that would take the helm and elect a successor to the Pope, to Peter. They had all these speculations, but one important point about all this is that they operated under the assumption that at least the elemental parts of the church would be retained. I mean, you would still have bishops in this universal church. And this is stressed by people like Cajetan, people like Francisco Vitoria, who went in depth with this idea of devolution to the universal church. They were the ones that expanded upon it and actually made some clarifying statements about it. They would clarify that you still need the bishops, and they were actually refuting some people who claimed that, well, the laity are natural electors to the Roman Pontiff, and some of these people actually, like this one guy on Twitter who was trying to refute me by using the example of Saint Ambrose, who was elected by popular acclaim and all that. But you still would need some people, representatives of the church governance, to at least receive that election. I mean, this is not a question of needing a sort of rubber stamp. That's not what it means. What it means is that you still need the government of the church somehow, either by express vote or by tacit approval, receive that election, accept that election. How do they accept that election? Well, by embracing this guy as a bishop of the church. Once they acknowledge that person as a bishop, and they acknowledge Ambrose, that's why they consecrated him. That election was valid, but laity are still not natural electors. And if you don't have representatives of the church government, it's basically a no-go. It's basically pointless. So, that's the problem with the sedeprivationists, because if you don't even have this, this framework, you don't even have all, at least the elemental parts of what makes the church, because the church, remember, as Trent taught, the church is composed of the teaching church and the taught church, the ecclesia docens and the ecclesia discens. If you don't have any of those two, and especially the ecclesia docens, that has the mission to govern, teach, and sanctify, which is the main mission of the church, you don't have a church. You don't have the church. There's no church without bishops, St. Jerome says. And this is this comprises the government of the church. So when you don't have an external authority that could validate that thesis is not viable from the get-go. You have no way of providing your thesis with any weight or authority. And that's a problem in canon law, because even if doctrine could be a source of canon law, it still needs to be validated at some point by external authority. And what you have are basically just speculations about the authority of the same people whose authority precisely is being questioned. So your fellow sedevacantists could simply claim, well, even if those cardinals were to say, oh well, you know what, I just realized that the last living pope was Pius XII, and from John the 23rd onward we have no pope. They have no reason to accept that. They have no reason to accept that they suddenly just received jurisdiction out of from some cooked up thesis by a French guy. It doesn't work. So it presents an unsurmountable obstacle because it cannot give certainty. There's no way to give this thesis any sort of certitude, even if it claims to have some background on other canonical provisions regarding similar situations of schismatic bishops that have sort of a material jurisdiction, material succession. But those bishops, when they are received by the church, by at least the Roman Church, they receive jurisdiction from the authorities of the Roman Church and from the Pope. You don't have that in this case. So it's pointless. It's pointless to speculate on something which doesn't have any degree of certitude. It doesn't give any. It has no precedent. Furthermore, and you don't have an external authority recognized by all parties that could certify that. And that's a problem, because you're not the judges. Basically, you're not authorities in the church to begin with. So it's ridiculous to keep trying to to speculate on these things when you don't have the possibility of having it approved. So that's why I didn't remain. I didn't accept that. I decided not to embrace that thesis, and I moved on. Because it doesn't solve the problem. So the other alternative, to have Our Lady with the apostles coming down from heaven and electing another pope, or Saint Peter himself coming down and electing another pope. Well, what happened to the claim that St. Peter would not abandon the governance of the church that he received once from our Lord. That once was in around 32, 33 AD. So there was an interruption, and he needed to come down to solve that. That was not supposed to happen according to Vatican I. Vatican I stated very clearly that Peter would have perpetual successors. Perpetual means without interruption. If there was an interruption that merited an extraordinary action, then it would not be perpetual. And furthermore, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, there's a high possibility that that's not going to happen. Okay, so I'm not going to base my faith on some event, some very improbable and very unlikely event. So I think it's time to consider other alternatives, other options, and there are. But in the meantime, well, I'll see you guys later. God bless.